Sister Carol Keehan is our speaker this morning. Sister Carol's Catholic Order, the Daughters of Charity, was an early organizer of hospitals, orphanages, and schools. The Daughters' commitment to serving the poor and vulnerable is literally what drives Sister Carol every day and in every way. Her resume shows you how, from the organizations she has led, including an inner-city hospital in Washington, D.C., to the awards, accolades, and honorary degrees that she has earned. But the real evidence of Sister Carol's contribution is what I saw when I was privileged to work with her personally for 10 years. And that is how she demonstrates perseverance in the face of peril, confidence and courage in the midst of criticism, and optimism when the odds are long. In 2010, Sister Carol was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world, following the role she played in helping to pass the Affordable Care Act. Please join me now in welcoming my former boss, the recently retired CEO of the Catholic Health Association and a true healthcare reform hero, Sister Carol Keehan. Well, thank you so much for being here and for getting here early in the morning and making it here for us this morning. So I want to share with our audience a little bit of kind of what happened going back now really 10 years, amazingly enough, to the passage of the Affordable Care Act. When you started at the Catholic Health Association, it was 2005. It was pre-President Obama. It was not a time when health reform was really in the air, but it was my job to help advance that work. When you started at CHA, why was it a priority for you to do that, especially given the political headwinds?
Well, to be frank with you, it has always been a priority for me. I've spent my life in healthcare. From the time I was 25, I was sent by the Daughters of Charity to open a children's hospital, and it was a children's hospital that cared for everybody in the whole area, every child in a private room, every child with excellent care. That's not the situation in most of America. And that's not the situation when you look at people who are pregnant, people who have diabetes. And so for me, the scandal of a nation with all the riches that the United States has, not to give everybody at least basic health care, and to promote their good health, it was just something that I couldn't stand. And so, and I watched, sadly, the loss of Hillary Clinton's effort when she was First Lady. It's always been a real concern of mine and a push. And we were not making the kind of progress we needed to make. And when I first came to CHA, some of you will remember the challenge we had with Senator Grassley over community benefit, over whether not-for-profit hospitals should really be tax exempt, over whether they really did anything for their community. So that was, and of course, when you want to raise that question, the first thing you look at is the salaries of leadership people. So in order to have a credible voice in the marketplace, we needed to get that off the table. So the first thing we had to do was establish in the minds of both sides of the aisle, Senator VAHHS, who was the ranking minority member on the Finance Committee, and Senator Grassley, who was the chair, that yes, we were doing what we said we would do. We were more than worthy of our tax-exempt status. And so that we had a credible voice, and our voice didn't seem like it was trying just to fluff our own nest, so to speak. So it was, and I've worked on, I'm a nurse first, but I have worked on the front lines with people who are poor all my life, and I know they're suffering. And so we just had to do something about it.
So it was still a tough climb, though.
Oh, it was a tough climb.
And in 2008, President Obama was elected on a
Yes.
promise of advancing health reform and creating a system that worked for everyone.
Right.
So what do you think made that moment unique, and how did CHA get into the game?
Well, first of all, the leadership, the board leadership of CHA could see that perhaps we were getting back to the right time to do this. For a long time after Hillary Clinton's effort blew up, because of a lot of misinformation, you all remember the Harry and Louise ads, but because of a lot of that misinformation, it was just toxic. Nobody wanted to touch health care on Capitol Hill. Nobody running for president wanted to touch health care because it was just the kiss of death. And so we could see that there was enough anxiety and people were hurting enough that it had a chance. But we had to do it in a better way than it had been done before. So way before President Obama was elected, we looked at, all right, how do you start to seed the ground? How do you try to make folks aware that this has got to be fixed and that it can be fixed and that everybody will be better off, not just poor people. Everybody will be better off. And so we started, and one of the things we did was your hire to make sure we had somebody full-time, not out there running a campaign, but seeding things in all the right places, doing focus groups, finding out what people really thought, where it was positive, where it wasn't. And then when we were ready, we developed our vision. And this was probably the smartest thing CHA did. We developed our vision for healthcare of the future. We never had a plan. We never had a bill that we were advocating for, so that we could be at everybody's table. And when people would say, well, I've got this way of doing da-da-da-da-da, sister, and could you endorse that? And I'd say, well, let's look at our vision. What does it do for this, this, and this? What does it do to promote health? What does it do to get to all of the people in this country having health care? And if it meets that standard, yeah, I can be on board. It's not, so we weren't going after saying Medicare for all or public option. We were saying we have to do this. We can do this. We're a very smart nation. And so these are the core elements that have to be there. That was really very helpful. And then, of course, you had President Obama sweep in with that promise and commitment to do it. So it was momentum we had to build on and not lose and not let people drown out with misinformation. And that is probably the hardest thing in Washington to avoid, is having misinformation kill you before you get started. I know Senator Casey said to me, because we had a lot of that, and he said, we were so focused when President Obama came in and get this off the ground the right way. We were focused on legislating. Look at this option, look at that option. And he said, the GOP, who did not expect to lose to President Obama, were focused on public relations. And they had built an incredible anti-healthcare for everybody case by the time. And so he said, we never focused enough as a Democratic Party on PR. And that was an important lesson for people to learn.
So can you remember the first time you met President Obama? What was the occasion?
Let me think. I think it was in the, well, yeah, I know it was. It was in the East Room when he did the kickoff, and he had senators and representatives. And at that point, Senator Kennedy was quite ill.
Right.
And this was his lifetime goal. And in the middle, after President Obama made his sort of kickoff speech, he came out from he had been back in the back. Senator Kennedy came out, and the place just went, the East Room of the White House went electric. And then after that, we broke up, and it was people like myself with senators and representatives and cabinet leaders talking about, all right, what are the pieces we have to get together? We were all in different rooms in the White House and in the executive office building, But you could see the competence and intelligence of the team President Obama was bringing together, and also the commitment. And of course, when you see Kennedy, who's literally dying, saying, don't lose sight of this, get this done, get this done. It was really very impressive.
So as we got to about February of 2009, there was a bill, formerly known as the Affordable Care Act, but widely known as Obamacare, which was very derogatory at the time. So it was very controversial, and at the end, right as we approached passage, it looked pretty perilous. So can you talk about what happened and what role CHA played there?
It always puts my blood pressure up, so. You know, Senator Casey was right. We hadn't done as much work as we needed to do on helping people to understand. I can remember talking to a group of doctors in Texas. That's not a trip anybody wants to make anytime soon. But I'm talking to all these doctors, and there was a panel of about 8 of us. I'm the last speaker, and every one of them talking about how utterly miserable it was going to be. They couldn't make their own decisions. After you were 70, you couldn't have insulin. You know, nobody was going to get a hip replacement for this. I mean, it was just horrible. And I finally said, you know, when I was a nursing supervisor, I used to sometimes say to a new graduate, could we, particularly we had an emergency, I'd say, could we think now and panic later so we can get this job done? And I said, stop and think, read the bill, look at the provisions. And I said, also, look at this president. And if you remember, right before President Obama was elected, he rushed back to Hawaii because his grandmother was dying. And she was dying of cancer. She had about 2 months to live, 3 months to live, and they hoped she'd live to see him elected president. And all of a sudden, she fell. And, you know, the only choice she had was be bedridden for whatever time you have left, or take a chance and have a hip replacement. Now, you start to think economically, a hip replacement in somebody who's really in palliative care, but she wasn't going to be able to sit up or do anything if she didn't have it. And here's this president who supposedly was going to take everything away from you, and he said it was her decision, but if Medicare wouldn't have covered it, we would have made it happen. And I said, that's the kind of person who's chairing this and leading this. Stop worrying about whether you're going to get insulin after you're 70. Get in there. And I will say, and I've said this to many of my physician friends, during the first round of Obamacare, getting it passed, the physicians were so divided that they were never a dominant voice. When we were protecting Obamacare, when John McCain did that famous vote to kill the effort to kill the Affordable Care Act, the physicians got their act together and they were a dominant voice in protecting the Affordable Care Act. But it is really important to take a look at it. One of the things that was particularly frustrating to me, because having been in maternal and infant care and children's hospitals, as well as emergency rooms in our urban hospitals, to see people use my church to prevent people from getting the care they need. You know, when the church, and I knew bishops who were over and over again desperately wanted to see people get the care they needed. But they had a group of people who had organizations. They have these great titles, focus on the family, pro-life this, pro-life that. And they all said, this will be the biggest expansion of abortion in the history of this nation if you vote for it. Well, so what's a bishop to do? And their staff believed it. And sometimes I wasn't so sure their staff really believed it. as much as they were still not happy that Obama got elected. But anyway, you can sort that out for yourselves. But so, you know, I have been pro-life all my life. I mean, that's why I'm in healthcare, because I believe in life. That's why I've been in, worked so hard for quality maternity care. And also because I know the women who say, I just can't afford to have a baby. And they can't. But if you can say, no, your baby is so important, and you are so important, that we'll find a way to get you maternity care, and we'll make sure there's pediatric care. People can make better choices. And people in this country should never, ever have to make a choice because they can't afford health care for themselves or their child. So, but as you may know, the people who get on this kick know, pro-life, and it's going to be huge abortion, opening the floodgates. Everybody will be having an abortion. Nobody will be having a hip replacement. I mean, it was abominable. And so, if I was at a joint session of Congress where President Obama said, there will be no federal funding of abortion in this bill. I can't tell you the page. It depends who prints it off, the government printing office or my Xerox machine. But it explicitly says in the bill, there'll be no federal funding of abortion. People in this country feel very strongly, and the compromise is, if the Supreme Court says that abortion is legal, is okay, maybe it's legal, but I don't necessarily think my tax dollars should pay for it. So he said that. Then he did an executive order and said there would be no federal funding of abortion. And someone said, well, executive orders get changed. They're not really that important. I said, Lincoln freed the slaves with them. That sort of had a little bit of an impact, in case you didn't notice. But, and then, so I had people screaming and hollering. And why would any sister, any daughter of charity of St. Vincent de Paul be pushing a bill that would do all this abortion? And I can tell you, it was pretty ugly. I was picketed time after time, people screaming at me. One day I was supposed to go over to the White House to meet with the president in the Roosevelt Room, and we had to put guards outside the building in Washington where our office is because they were going to have a picket. Time after time, when I would give a talk at a university or a school, I would be picketed. I mean, the letters I got were just not, worth doing. And I mean, it went all over the world. I had been asked, I was on an international board of Catholic healthcare at the Vatican. And I had been asked in April to do a 10-minute talk on a nothing subject in November at a meeting at the Vatican. I said, sure, no big deal. And all of a sudden, a week before that November meeting, the Secretary of State of the Vatican said she is not allowed on the stage. And furthermore, she's not any longer allowed to be on the committee. Now, when the Secretary of State throws you off the stage and off of the committee, and you've been a daughter of charity for 40, 45 years, that ain't pretty. And a number of them wrote to the people who were superiors and said, get this woman out of the Daughters of Charity. So, I mean, it was not a fun time, but at the same time, it was always the right thing to be doing. And, I don't mind hearing a different perspective, but, as somebody said, you have a right to what you believe, but you don't have a right to your own facts. And that was an important thing. And a lot of it, some of it I thought was a bit on the racist side, and some of it was just downright political. If he gets health care that works for people, it will hurt us in the next election. And so we can't let him be, we can't let him have a winner. And so it was really pretty tough. But, I always say when I first came out for the bill publicly, and we had been supporting the bill, working, get it right here, this clause has got to be fixed. And we have this little newspaper, it comes out every 2 weeks, I call it this dinky little paper. The editor of it kills me every time I say that. But it was a little, I don't think anybody read it, but a few of our members. Well, it comes out on Friday afternoon. Now, who do you think is waiting for the Catholic Health World newspaper on Friday afternoon to read it? So I put now is the time to get this done and formally endorsed it. My phone was ringing off the hook. I said, "You read that already?" And they said, "Did you really mean it?" I said, "Of course I meant it. I've meant it all along." And so it did make a big difference because many of the Catholic members or the pro-life members in Congress were badgered because people kept saying, you've heard so-and-so from Focus on the Family or Bishop so-and-so, and you'll be voting for abortion. So it gave people the ability to deal with the facts of what was in the bill to get to and vote for it. And I know people who voted for it who instantly got thrown out of pro-life organizations and lost their seat at the next election. One of them from Pennsylvania said to me, "I was only in Congress one term, but it was the most important term in my lifetime to be in Congress, and I don't regret losing my place because I had the chance to do the most important vote." And just last summer, all the committee chairs in the House and Senate who had voted for it were at the Aspen Institute's thing. Every single one of them who really got beat up for it said it was the most important thing they had done in their whole careers. You take somebody like Senator Baucus, who'd worked so long. He said it was the most important thing I ever did.
So, Sister, when you're talking about the picketing, it reminded me that I had to set up a voicemail box to handle all the hate mail we were getting. And you told me...
That's what an assistant's for.
So I got to listen to all those and didn't share them with you or others. There were plenty, and they were really nasty, especially from people who claim to be pro-life. But there were some really positive moments.
Oh, wonderful.
And one of them, I recall, was the night that the bill passed the House, and I was privileged enough to be there that night. I was in the chamber. And the next morning, if I'm remembering this right, so that was March 10th, 2010, the next morning, you got a call from President Obama, and you were not able to answer. Isn't that right?
Well, it was actually that night.
Okay.
I had been in Paris for St. John's University board, and then I went to Rome, and John Podesta, the chief of staff, was in Rome running the Rome Marathon. And President Obama called, and I'm not a techie. And so I was talking to people, I was doing the things you do when you're traveling with a university board and, trying to be sociable. And all of a sudden, I noticed I had a call from the White House, and it was President Obama, and I had let him go to voicemail. What can you say? But anyway, he was always very, very gracious about, and very grateful, and always worried, that they'd hear I had gone to Rome for something, and it would be like an ordinary thing, a meeting, and his faith-based person, Joshua, would be panicked. "Did you get sent for? Are you okay?" I'm saying, "Cool it, Joshua, cool it." It was, there were just a lot of people. That morning, the night before, when the call had come, John Podesta, who was dead from the marathon, and his family came over to the hotel where I was so we could celebrate. And then the next morning, the ambassador and his wife, the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican, he came to the hotel, and people kept saying, "Who is this woman?"
And just to be clear, that voicemail, which you played for us many times because we made you, literally said, "Thank you, Sister Carol, for what you've done for the country." So it was a significant moment. So How do you think we're doing? Clearly, the political environment in the country right now is really toxic and polarizing. Healthcare is controversial, although the Affordable Care Act itself is probably more popular among the people than ever, despite administration attempts to continue to tear it down. But a lot of people have coverage who didn't have it when you and I were doing this work 12 years ago. So where do you think we are? How are we doing?
Well, I think there's a positive, and then there's a very concerning negative. 20 million people with the rollout got health care that didn't have it. That's an incredible thing. You take a place like West Virginia that statistically got more than every other state except one, Kentucky, Mitch McConnell's state. A greater percentage of people covered. And one of the things they said that it did, and we were looking at, it took care of your diabetes, your hypertension, all of that. And they said it actually, the biggest impact was it reduced the suicide rate because so many people were committing suicide because they just couldn't afford their medication. They had, done all, milked it as much as they could from churches and family members. And they just couldn't keep going. And so they had a reason to believe that they could walk into the drugstore with their card and get insulin or get hypertensive medicines, and that made a really big difference. I remember one time giving a talk, and this is the thing that I think took most Americans by surprise, middle and upper class Americans, giving a talk, and I was talking about what was in the Affordable Care Act for everybody. And I talked about the fact that having no pre-existing conditions, people couldn't be turned down, or their children couldn't be turned down because of pre-existing conditions. And I talked about no lifetime limit. And a woman who was on the faculty at the university, you would look at this woman and you would say, no, this is a gal that's got it made. She's got a great education, she's got a great job, she's got the American dream. She's really got it together. And what happened was afterwards, she came up to me and she said, sister, those two things you talked about, those two things totally changed my life and my family's life. She said, my husband has muscular dystrophy and he has it really badly. And my daughter has cystic fibrosis and she has it really badly. And we try to forego care so that we don't hit the lifetime limit. And I know I can't change insurances because I'll have insurance for everything but what we need it for most. She said, those two things, excuse me, totally changed my life. And many, many people found that out. I just saw yesterday, good news and bad news. We, for the first time since the bill passed, the number of uninsured is on the rise again because of all the efforts by the current administration. And also, there's like about $750 million that's going to be given back to subscribers because insurance companies have charged much more than they've spent on health care. And it used to be that could just go to your bottom line and your stockholder. Now, every year there's been millions come back, but now we've got this year, 750 million will come back to subscribers. So we're doing well in many things. The bill is better understood. We have not gotten over the political opposition to the bill in many states where it would save the state so much money if they would just do Medicaid expansion. I mean, when you think about the number of the hundreds of thousands of people in each state that has not expanded Medicaid, and the states that have expanded it, it has been very good for them, for the state as well as for the people, and for the providers. But on the other hand, we do have more and more people saying, don't you dare. don't you dare do that. And so I think right now we've made some progress, but certainly the Supreme Court allowing Medicaid to be optional, the administration not paying insurance companies the risk corridors, which were there to try to make sure we got everybody in and we got a robust insurance. Rural areas have not gotten as much benefit from it as they should have. So there are a number of areas we need to fix. And, you know, there is the will to fix, but there's not the political will. And there's goodwill on both sides of the aisle, but the power in the White House and the power in the leadership of the Senate will not allow bills to come that could do so much to make this better for so many people.
So part of the promise of the Affordable Care Act was coverage, and then another piece of it was delivery system reform. Mm-hmm. And we're doing work here in Vermont, the Allpayer Model. I shared some information with you about it, which is really trying to focus on wellness instead of illness and keeping people healthy, mm-hmm. And making it an outcomes-based system. Do you think that's the right work, and what is your impression of what we're trying to do here?
Well, I think it's courageous work. And I was a hospital CEO for a few years in Maryland, which is sort of the ultimate all-payer. And let me tell you, I loved it. I mean, if you create the right incentives, you drive the system in the right direction. And that is very important. We have so many perverse incentives in the healthcare financing system. For 30 years, I taught the Japanese healthcare. And I used to say there's so many things about our country and our health system to imitate. You know, our efforts at risk management, our efforts at quality, but do not, under any circumstance, ever try to imitate our payment system. Our healthcare financing system is a misery. And even when you want to do the right thing, the incentives are so perverse. And so I think it's really gutsy. And you guys are of a size that you could make a difference and of a size that you could get a handle around it and bring everybody on. You're taking a very courageous step in revisiting incentives. And that is, until we revisit incentives, until it is not better to be a stockholder of an insurance company than a policyholder of that insurance company, we will have problems. Until the Medicare system, the Medicaid system are not, we don't spend our money better than we're doing it right now, we will have troubles. And until we look at what's the best way to finance medical education in this country, you know, what are the right incentives for nursing? I can tell you the system in Maryland has its challenges, but the Maryland Hospital Association, if you ask what their key policy is, and it has been now for over 30 years, it's keeping their all-payer system. And you don't have the perverse incentives to cut staffing, you know, to be the lowest FTE per patient day. You don't have the perverse incentives to say, I'm going to market away from the Medicaid population. Because if you're high option Blue Cross or Medicaid, we're going to get exactly the same payment for your care. That makes a huge, huge difference. So, I mean, it's not perfect, believe me, but it certainly is a movement in the right direction. And I think what you all are doing and getting experience with will be invaluable, I hope, to people in Vermont, but I also hope to the rest of the country.
So before we open it up to questions from the audience, I wanted to just shift gears a little bit and talk about your career, your trajectory. So you started out as a nurse, and you have a master's in business. and then was a hospital CEO and association CEO, and also someone who I witnessed absolutely loves politics. So talk about that sort of story arc and what you have learned from it.
Well, you know, I have a master's in healthcare finance. My passion is nursing. And I only got this master's in finance because I had a lot of really good ideas. But when you don't, you know, it's sort of like, you know, we jumble people up when we start talking about, you know, healthcare things and, you know, the white blood cells and the T cells and all of that stuff. And every time I came up with a really great idea, the finance people could say, well, the impact of that on indirect expenses and the Medicare reimbursement and DISH and blah, 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 blah. And so I had to learn so I could say, no, here we go. You know, if you want to talk basis points, I'll talk basis points. If you want to talk healthcare delivery, I'll talk healthcare delivery. So that's why I did it. Almost everything I've done, you know, one of the things that's good about being a daughter of charity is, you know, people don't wait for you to look for, what would I like to do? They say, sister, we'd like you to do. And I've never really wanted to do almost anything I've been asked to do. And I've loved everything I've done. And so I always say to people, you know, be open. You will find so much that you really enjoy and you love and you can make a difference. You know, when people said to me about applying for the job at CHA, I said, no way. I am not an association girl. Get that in your head. Almost 14 years later, here I am. So, you know, I think it is really important to know what you want, how you want to contribute, and also to be open to other ways of contributing that you never envisioned.
So within those jobs that you both wanted to do and maybe didn't necessarily want to do, what was the most rewarding moment or thing as you look back?
Well, you know, when I was 25 and they sent me to open a children's hospital in Florida, I used to think, I want to be buried here running this children's hospital. And, you know, my friends used to say, you know, people used to say about me, she's going to need a psychiatrist when they take her away from the children's hospital, because I loved it so much. And my friends would say she needs one now. So, and then I came to what was considered the worst job for a daughter of charity to get, the head of nursing at Providence Hospital in Washington. I loved that job. You know, I just loved that job. And I began teaching internationally while I was there and did that for 30 years, you know, while I was doing that job. I love being CEO of a couple of hospitals. And I thought, you know, this is just it. You can make it happen. You can say, no, don't tell me it can't be done. It's going to be done. We're going to make it. We're going to get it done. One of the sisters who was older than me was a hospital CEO. And whenever they would be, maintenance people, for instance, would say, sister, you can't do this reconstruction here. And she'd say, we just send people to the moon. What do you mean we can't do a couple of doors here and you know, fix a wall there? But I loved being CEO. And I really, really didn't think there was any future for me in an association. And I just, so it's like almost every time you loved, and you didn't think it was possible to love something more than the last thing you left. And that's why when I'm talking to young people, I always say be open to things you never thought you would want to do, you never thought you could do, and the possibilities that are there.
So we have some time. If people in the audience have questions.
I'm just kind of curious as to how you see faith-based systems surviving or thriving in this country and the status of that, because they're going through consolidations like the rest of us. So I'd be really interested in your assessment of that.
It's sort of like people say about not-for-profit hospitals. When the for-profit potential was growing so quickly, you know, in in the sort of the heyday of HCA when they were buying everything up. It is always possible, if we could exist as faith-based hospitals when there was no national coverage system for anybody. Why do we say we couldn't exist now? We've just got to have the will to do it and work hard at making it happen and at taking advantage of the opportunities and also doing what we can to undermine the obstacles. And it's easy to say, oh, and sometimes I get a little bit irritated at people who say, well, we just have too much bad debt and too much charity care in this place. And I said, the problem with you, sweetie, is you don't know how to manage your AR. You don't know how to get out there and figure out what you need to do at a political level, nationally and statewide, to get the Medicaid system in your state to be more responsive, to deal with the insurance commissioner in your state so your insurance companies are more reasonable and responsible. Come on, now I've been on the board, and this may get me shot, of 3 Blue Cross Association boards, but I can still say that. A lot of times we blame the people who don't have coverage for our problems, and it takes goodwill, and it takes putting your money in the right place. I've always said the most important thing to do is to staff with the right people in the right numbers, and life will do very well for you. I remember one time when I was a young VP of nursing, and I had worked so hard to get a clinical ladder so that we could reward really good nurses. And this, the finance guy, after we had gotten it all approved, budgeted, we had announced it with great flourish, everybody was high on it, and the finance guy goes in and convinces the sister administrator, this is going to cost you your shirt, and it's going to cost $1 million more a year, blah, 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 blah. Never contrasting that with turnover, et cetera. But anyway, I walk in and she said, Bill just told me that thing you had me approve is going to cost $1 million. And I said, well, except for the money that you spend on my salary, that's the best money you'll spend this year. And, there was nothing else you could say. I mean, give it up. And so I think whether you're a not-for-profit, a for-profit, or a faith-based, you've got to want to do it right. And you've got to work at doing it right. And you've got to stop having all these cheap excuses that are like elevator speeches, I call them. We have these 4 things, way too many. The uninsured went up, our catchment area, blah, blah. Give it up. Get to work. That's what I used to say to him.
Yeah, did we have one back there before we go? Yeah, right back there, Devin. Yeah, there you go. Then we'll come over here.
Thanks. My question really kind of dovetails into a comment you made earlier about the perverse incentives in healthcare, and then kind of the direction of your answer to his question is, healthcare system and your comments to Japan about how don't mimic our payment system. We're too big to fail as healthcare now with the growth of GMP, and there's been pressure on hospitals, there's been pressure on physician salaries, while profits of insurance companies, big pharma, technology, the cost of drugs. I would be interested, since you love politics, on some ideas of how we can align some of those incentives without creating failure of an industry that's now 20% of our GMP.
Well, I think we're at almost the same place we were when we were looking at the Affordable Care Act. Right? We're looking at trying to find a way. We've got to spend more time and effort helping people understand how the healthcare dollar in this country is being spent. And that is very difficult when you are up against the largest lobbyist, and by largest lobbyist, I mean the one who gives the most money in the nation. You know, pharma outspends the National Rifle Association. So it is very challenging. And right behind it are people like the insurance companies. And for our senators and representatives, it is so expensive to get reelected. They spend so much of their time on raising money. And so I think we've got to become relentless about, you know, people say, well, you know, the Medicare program is so expensive. We can't afford to take care of our seniors like this. Yes, we can, but we can't afford to take care of them, you know, on an open credit card. And, you know, when you say the largest purchaser of drugs in the country is not allowed to negotiate for drug prices, that's utter insanity. You know, if you're the biggest buyer of anything, you insist on getting the best price. Either that or you are insane. And so we've got to relentlessly go after helping people to understand so that, I mean, I know Speaker Pelosi has a bill that she wants to introduce that is going to take on this incrementally, at least. But you know, it's in the law, and the law has to be changed, that Medicare can't negotiate prices. Well, the billions that does is just that are wasted by that is just overwhelming. And so I think we've got to look at those kinds of things. And that's why it was so important to get things a start on it in the ACA. Things like the insurance company has got to spend at least 80% of what it charges on health care. Well, now, if you could start to see the things that they were trying to make be health care. And we're indebted to Secretary Sebelius because she, before she was Secretary of HHS, was the insurance secretary for Kansas, and before she was governor of Kansas. So she understands insurance companies, and she was pretty relentless on saying, no. You know, this TV commercial that you're doing is nothing but a commercial. It's not a wellness program, and if you throw in eat carrots, it's still not going to be a wellness effort. So we've got to be relentless about that because you've got to align incentives. I mean, you have to do it for your raising teenagers. So it shouldn't be surprising that you have to do it for the biggest industry. And the incentives are just so poorly aligned right now. You're absolutely correct. And you say, well, we can't get our arms around all of it. No, but each effort to deal with that is really important. And to take advantage of this announcement of what the payback is going to be is a really important time for hospitals talking to their community and their representatives. And what you're doing with your program, I think, is going to be very helpful.
I think we had Norm, a question here. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your talk. It's very, very exciting. Could you get back to workforce and educational expenses for physicians and nurses? How can the hospital association or the healthcare industry do better in terms of helping with workforce?
You know, I think that is incredibly important because you say, well, look at the physician disillusionment. Well, if you were 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, 3 years of residency, and you're going to come out and make $150,000 a year, and you have $225,000 of medical school debt, and you live in this environment where you're putting up with systems that don't work, this payment system works here, that payment system works there, you're going to be disillusioned. Either that or you're crazy. And I think there are much, much better ways to do this. I also think we've got to partner with the AAMC and look at medical education much differently. There are other countries that do it better than we do. And you can't have this massive faculty and you say, yeah, he's world renowned and he's all over the world and we're paying him $3 million and he's writing a book and he's given 1,000 talks and he's doing consulting for a drug company and blah, blah, blah. We've got to get all that squared away. I mean, and so that's a really important thing to do so that we are really putting good money after good physician teachers, teaching our medical students and doing it in a way, I mean, there are so many more creative ways of doing it. Once I took the board down to Mexico and I wanted them to see one of our healthcare systems, Christus, in Texas. Their model includes 1/3 of their portfolio out of the United States. And the first place was Mexico. And you say, okay, do I want to go to Mexico? I would have been treated for anything in that hospital. And the Joint Commission had just accredited it and frankly said, you have better equipment than any hospital in the United States. And that's because they could be the Delta site for all kinds of x-ray equipment and things like that. But one of the things they did is their medical schools were free. But you had to work 2 years in a low-income clinic afterwards. And so they were able to give, in these little villages, they had 24-hour care for people. If you could pay a peso or two, good. If you couldn't, no problem. These folks were, and they learned to love people who were poor. They learned how decent and good they were, and people got good care. And these folks were paid, not an inordinate salary, but they weren't paying back for most of the rest of their life their medical school debt. And so I think we've got to look at that, and it goes back to what makes up the cost of what we're doing. Well, the same is true with nursing, and we've got to find ways to capture making being part of the healthcare team an incredibly wonderful experience. And people don't mind when they, I always say when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And you see that in hospital people. That's one of the things I missed at CHA is wandering the floors, because people really, if you need hospital people to really get the job done, they do it. I mean, there's an incredible ingenuity and dedication and devotion. But the truth of the matter is, when you all day long don't have the supplies you need, you can't get the lab work back. You got to do this, you got to do that. I mean, and you got to learn what this law means and that. Give it up. And so, or half of the people that you're working with are from an agency and they could care less because they'll be at someplace else tomorrow. It's those kinds of things that we've got to fix so that we continue to have the most extraordinarily talented team there. And I think, again, honest conversations, and you're of a size, you can have those honest conversations, and you can have them as an industry. And I think that's a gift you have. When you're in a state that's mammoth in size and scope and has lots of different kinds of competitors in it, it's very difficult. And you have a spirit of that Vermont is known for. So I would say you can do a lot that will model the right way to look at these issues for the rest of us.
I think you can tell from the way Sister Carol talks about things that working for her it didn't necessarily work if you didn't have an answer to try BS. So it just didn't fly. I think we have time for another one if there's any other questions out there. A couple more. Well, I'll ask one while people are getting brave. So, Sister, you've been retired for, what, a couple months? Not even?
Sort of.
Yeah. So what are you doing and what's next?
Well, actually, the day I retired from CHA, I flew to the Middle East to help our sisters in our hospital. I've been taking vacation to do that, so I flew to the Middle East to help our sisters in Nazareth. And I know sometimes we think the board is such an important piece. This hospital has been in operation in Nazareth since 1898, and it had its first board meeting in July of this year.
New governance model.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm doing a little of that. And then I had to, I've been replaced at CHA by an incredible woman, Sister Mary Haddad. And I cannot tell you how happy I am about that. But I came back from the Middle East to Rome to take her around because, you need to know all those folks in Rome because they have an important impact on Catholic hospitals in the United States. So we spent about not quite a week in Rome meeting Cardinal so-and-so and Cardinal so-and-so. And so I did that. So then since then, I have been trying to get my life in order after 14 years of throwing it in the closet, throwing it in the desk, and moving on to the next thing. So I am quite hopeful. I've said to people, I cannot die until I clean out my closet. The Daughters of Charity will talk about me for 20 years if they have to clean that closet.
Yeah, so your comment about Rome and taking Sister Mary around reminded me of the trip we were on, and right before I took this job, actually, in 2016, I got to go on the Rome retreat. And I don't know if you remember this, but I was in St. Peter's. We had just toured the cathedral, and a long procession of Dominican priests was walking through, and I was kind of having an intense moment. I'm not even Catholic, but I worked for the Catholic Health Association for 12 years. And this one priest sort of stopped right in front of me and just looked me in the eye and said, "Hello, Jeff." And I said to myself, okay, you got me, Catholics, I'm in. It took 12 years, and then I looked down and realized my badge was on. So, but it was still a nice moment. And that was a great trip. Any other questions for Sister Carol from the audience?
Given all that's been in the press about the opioid crisis and the politics right now, I'm just kind of curious in your history in navigating both the politics before the recent years, thoughts on how we got into this mess.
Well, that's money. I mean, the incredible amount of money that was made with opioids. And we have to admit, to some extent, we played into it. I remember as a hospital CEO, we were talking about the fifth vital sign. Do you remember that campaign? People shouldn't have to suffer, da-da-da-da-da. And it was so easy. And the pharmaceutical companies, when you look at the places in this country, the little small towns that got 30% of all the opioids in that state. I mean, you just have to say that it was insanity. I remember being at Geisinger system about 2 years ago, and the guy who was the head of Geisinger said, you are 5 times more likely to become addicted to opioids if you live in the Geisinger catchment area, which is rural Pennsylvania, than if you live in New York City. I had no idea. But that's also true of early and out-of-wedlock pregnancies and suicides. I mean, and so you just say, why didn't we take it? Why didn't we stop that. But there was so much money, sort of like that Eva Perón, song, "The Money Kept Rolling In." But now I say, right now, why are we allowing vaping? And don't tell me we will take the bubble gum out and take the spearmint out and we'll keep right on. No. We should outlaw vaping. When you look at how much smoke people are putting in their lungs, I mean, why are we doing a new epidemic? And people are dying with that. So I think the real question now is, what did we learn from the opioids? And it certainly is making a lot of people a lot of money. What did we learn from the opioid crisis? And what kind of structures are we going to put in place to not let that happen again? Because, I mean, look at the next time you see on television, look at people smoking and look at the quantity of smoke they're blowing out. That's far more going in your lung than we had before. Never mind all the stuff about, where the tube is and all that. I mean, why are we ever letting that happen? So I would say some of us with goodwill played a little bit into it, but more it was the money. It was so incredibly lucrative.
Well, I think that's our time. I have a couple announcements I need to do, so please join me in thanking Sister Carol.
Thank you.